Hello and welcome. I am thrilled to bring you today's guest on the Love Your Life show. I almost said the Today Show because she's been on the Today Show. But this is not the Today Show. This is the Love Your Life show. And this week I have Michelle Icard on the show. She's a speaker, author, and educator who helps kids, parents, and teachers navigate the complicated social world of early adolescence. Okay. Her latest book, 14 Talks by Age 14, guides readers through the 14 essential conversations parents need to have with their kids before they start high school. Her first book, Middle School Makeover, Improving the Way You and Your Child Experience the Middle School Years, is a primer for the social and emotional changes parents and kids navigate when midlife meets middle school under one roof. Okay. Michelle is a member of the Today Show parenting team and NBC News Learn. Her work has been featured in the Washington Post, the Chicago Tribune, CNN, Time, and People magazine. Her middle school leadership programs, Athena's Path and Hero's Pursuit, have been implemented at schools across the country, and she speaks around the globe at schools and parenting events. I wanted to have her on the Love Your Life show today for that reason, for those reasons for sure, and how she helps us navigate communication with our kids if you have kids, but also if you don't have kids, don't hit stop, keep listening, because she is an expert at giving us a framework for communication that has helped me tremendously in my conversations with my adult children, with my spouse, with other people in my life. And I am just thrilled to share her expertise and humor with you today. This is a great show. Listen in. Well, hello and welcome, Michelle. I am thrilled to have you on the Love Your Life show. As we spoke briefly about your book, and you have two books that has been very helpful for me to read. And while a lot of my audience are moms and dads, a lot also are not. And I had this big aha moment the other day when I listened to many of your podcasts and was using it with my kids. And then I found myself acting like a middle schooler in communication with my husband. And I was like, wait a minute, she'd be a great guest for our show. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. And I'm delighted you said that. That is some really unexpected and fun feedback that I've been hearing from folks is I'm using this at work. I'm using it with my partner, so hopefully your audience will get communication tips for any age and stage.
They absolutely will, because I just love your work, and it definitely has resonated with me. And then it is also helping me in relationship with my kids. So could you give us just a brief background on how you got to be doing what you're doing?
Absolutely. So I have been doing what I'm doing for 15 years. And what I'm doing is helping anyone who supports a middle schooler or an adolescent through their years. So that's teachers and parents and mentors and caregivers. And I am really interested in the social emotional development of kids this age and of their parents.
Thank you.
And so my work is really focused around sort of keeping up with the research, and some of it is anecdotal that I do through the programs that I run, and then some of it is just going through the studies. And then figuring out how to best serve that up to the public in a way that is relatable and understanding and hopefully humorous too, and gives them tips that they can incorporate into their life to make adolescence a little less rocky.
Yeah, well, they definitely help me, and it helps me as I'm coaching parents of middle schoolers. And then I also work with some groups of middle schoolers. So it helps with all of that. And I want to dive into your framework for conversation, but something you just said had me remember two parts that I'd love for you to speak of. And one is how you speak of how in middle school, it really is our period to move from, not quite sure what you call it, but sort of the boss of our kids, like telling them what to do, into a more consultant role. Could you speak a little of that and the importance of us realizing that?
Yeah, so essentially, what we do as parents up until early adolescence is we are kind of the full-time manager. And so we make all of the decisions for our kids that really have anything to do with their identity. So we buy the clothes and we put them in their room, and we may give them a choice between two, I want the red pants or the blue pants, but we're creating those choices. We figure out who they're going to be friends with by coordinating play dates based on what's convenient for us or which parents we want to talk to. We sign them up for hobbies or activities or sports, again, based on the family schedule, based on what's convenient. Like, we're free Sunday afternoons. I hope you like horseback riding.
Right.
I hope you like pottery. We're going to give it a shot. It's what we got. So we are making all of these decisions for them. And when they are at about age 11, they go through the process of beginning to develop an independent identity. And one of the first things that they want to do there is make choices on who they are in the world, who they hang out with, how they represent themselves. And parents need to make a very conscious shift from being the manager and often the micromanager to the assistant manager. That's really important so that kids can get practice learning how to be their own manager. Otherwise, you find yourself with a full grown adult who doesn't know how to do anything for themselves, and nobody wants to be in that position. So you have to start a little earlier than you think.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that, because it's never too late to start, but it is part of that, letting the kid make their own decisions and stepping back into more of the, like, well, what do you think is best? Because I also have clients with college age students or beyond, who are, the kids are then calling or texting every minute, Mom, what do you think? Mom, what do you think? And it's that, like, oh, hold on. Your opinion matters too. So stepping back into that. So thank you, because that is helpful for me to remember when I still want to be the manager, and be like, Susie, you are now the assistant manager, or you can be a consultant if they want your input. Go for it.
Yes, I think that's another great terminology. Using this sort of a businessy language is helpful because it removes a layer of emotion. And most often, I do an exercise with parents around this concept where I say, think about the worst boss you ever had and list some of those characteristics. And they will often say things like, oh, they were too controlling, or they were overly emotional, or they took credit for things that they shouldn't. They'll come up with a list. And then I will say, that was sort of the manager. And the assistant manager's job description would be flipping this list completely. So when you remove a layer of emotion, it might feel a little bit more like a business transaction, but actually kids love that. And they are so much more responsive, and there is much more space for them to grow. And I think it's easier on us too.
Well, that's so much of the coaching that I do, is that we have the things that happen in our lives, and then we get to choose what we think about it. So our child, running up to their room and slamming the door, that's a fact. And we can just view that as, okay, that is them individuating and showing their own colors, and not take it personally. Well, we can step a little out of that. Everything, revolves around me as a parent. We can find some peace there, which is helpful.
Yes, I often say, have a hobby. That's my best advice to you. Have something you love to do that has nothing to do with being a parent, and do it a lot while your kids are in middle school.
Oh, great. Yes, leave them alone. Well, this is a good place to get into your brief acronym for conversations. Is that the correct term? But I love how you use the word brief to help us set up conversations. And again, listeners, if you don't have kids, pay attention, because you can use this with your partners or business colleagues also, or your own parents.
Oh, that's a good one. Yes.
Yeah.
Anyone who might be a slightly emotional listener, this will work.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Okay, so brief, as you mentioned, is an acronym, and each letter stands for a step in the process for having a more meaningful conversation with your tween or teen or husband or coworker. So I like that each letter stands for a step in the process, and I love that it spells brief, because one thing that I want parents to understand is that there's no way to have a perfect conversation. So take that pressure off of yourself. If you feel like you have to talk about something that is difficult or slightly unknown to you, or could feel awkward, or whatever it may be, having a short talk where you get in and out pretty quickly is a way to keep the door open so you can find out more information, do your research, grow, learn, ruminate, whatever it is, and then have more. So let's go through the steps. So B in brief stands for begin peacefully. And that can look like a couple different things. It can be as simple as, again, checking our emotions, taking a deep breath. It can be scheduling a time to talk, which I find is one of the most successful ways to start a conversation with a kid this age, or with anybody who's a bit more sensitive. And I think of it this way: when you're the one who has the agenda, let's say you're talking to your kid, oh, hey, we need to talk about grades. Your child is going to feel really put on the spot. Like, well, you know exactly what, you came prepared. And, and I didn't know this was coming. So instead, if you said something like, hey, we haven't looked at grades in a while, we should touch base. Do you want to do it tonight after dinner or right at bedtime? So
Mhm.
give them a little bit of ownership on timing here. The R is relate to your kid or relate to the other person. It's a way of showing that you're not having this conversation because you are suspicious or you have an ulterior motive, or any of that. It's a way of establishing right off the bat, look, we're on the same team. I
Mm.
just Either I just want to talk to you for the fun of it,
Yeah.
or I just want to talk to you to be helpful to you in some way, but establish that right off the bat.
Mhm.
The E, let's see, BRI. The I is interview for data. And that sounds a little clinical, and I want it to, because this is your opportunity to ask questions. And the questions are really meant to sort of clarify the other person's understanding of what you're talking about. So
Mhm.
it's not meant to be a deep dive into personal things. And I find this most relevant when you're talking about something, particularly as a parent, that scares you. So let's say you need to talk about vape because it's
Mhm.
really popular. And so when you get to the, oh, good, I'm at I can start to interview. Have you ever done vape? Do any of your kids do vape? Can you tell me who they are so I can talk to their parents? It's not that. It's more along the lines of, what's your understanding of what vape does to your body? What, how prevalent do you think it is? Do you think adults are overreacting, or is it really like most kids are trying it or doing it? What do you think about the way the media is covering it? These are neutral questions to get your kids to begin to talk and open up. If you go right for the real personal stuff, they're going to shut down right
Mhm.
off the bat. The E is echo what you hear. And everybody knows what this sounds like from either their own therapy or watching TV shows. But this is like, oh, okay, it sounds like what you're saying is X, or it feels like you think this is true. Am I hearing that correctly?
Mm.
And then the F, the final step, is feedback. And that is sort of the moment, the drum roll moment, like you've been waiting for. And I find it is the place where most parents start. And that's what causes most conversations to derail.
Okay. So that's where, I mean, that's absolutely where you sort of get in quick, and the feedback would be more like your advice or what you're thinking about vaping or.
Yeah, depending on the conversation, it could be advice, it could be your reaction, it could be your insight. It could be at that point that you think, wow, I need to set some limits and boundaries,
Mm.
based on
Yeah.
what we're talking about. So it could be a stronger reaction, or it could be a lighter, fun reaction. But this is the moment where, yes, you are the authority,
Mhm.
and you do have a lot of wisdom to share. And my hope with this book is that you will get the opportunity to share that. But with kids this age, it's all about building rapport.
Mhm.
And so if you start with your insight and your wisdom and your experiences, your kid's going to shut down
Mhm.
until you've had a little volley back and forth. So that's what the 4 steps prior are all about.
Well, and this is why I love this process for this age or any age. I know that it's brief, and I really appreciate that. So there isn't this pressure like this is my one shot to have the conversation, but it is brief. Yet at the same time, it sort of slows down the conversation, and it's helped me from diving right in. I often, when I think of framing conversations with my kids or my spouse or a friend or a family member, I often think of starting soft, but then I tend to dive right in and adding in the other layers of interviewing and relating and echoing back has very much served me, for sure. I just had an incident this weekend with curfew, and I set a time for my son to come home, and he was not home at that time. And so then the next day it gave me a chance to slow down. What is my intent of the conversation? This is my son. I want to stay connected to him. I'm not the disciplinarian or manager. How do I come from that place of befriending and starting peacefully, as you say, with the B, like begin kind, and then also questioning what was going on, what getting out of my own head and the reason like I said this time you're wrong and figuring out what was going on.
So I'm so curious, how did your son respond to this method?
It went really freaking well because
Yeah. Yay.
because I just, I started peacefully. Well, another thing that you have said, I've heard you say, or you wrote about, is not sitting face to face and like staring at, so we were sitting and eating breakfast, both looking out at the window. So we were not looking at each other, but I just started and said, hey, how was last night? What was it? And started with sort of the questioning and what's going on. And sounds like it was fun. And then I did go into, so we said that you'd be home at this time and you were not. Could you tell me what was going on? And he had a very good explanation as to why he was not home there. And so the feedback on my part ended up being less punitive or consequence directed and more like, okay, if this happens again, can you text me before the time passes so that I'm aware and I can manage my own, and then we'll move on from there. But it really ended up, no tears on either of our part.
I mean, I have chills. I'm thrilled. I really do have goosebumps because that is exactly what I wanted to have happen with the book. I mean, we grow a little, they grow a little. You each learned this really cool way to manage your relationship in a way that keeps it really intact. And next time he's not going to be like, well, there's no point telling my mom that I can't come home because whatever the good
so
reason.
rigid, or they're right. I need
Somebody
to
was
lie.
drunk and I had to help them because I was sober, and like whatever it might be, that we would be like, yay. We need the opportunity to hear that, and they will not tell us these things unless we create that open door. So I love it.
Yeah, another thing I want to circle back to is you said that sort of the begin peacefully can include an invitation to have the conversation in the first place, because that is another time I used this with my college age son, and we were talking about finances, and I just sent him a text and said, hey, let me know when you're available to talk about finances. I did give him a deadline because he's the type that would be like, all right, in August, I'm free. That's like 4 months from now. But I said, tell me sometime this weekend that we can talk. And that just allowed, I find that allows him, who's sort of my like put off the conversation, it gives him a framework, but then it also, in inviting, saying, when can we talk about this? If he was more anxious and he said, can we talk right now? That gives him the opportunity, again, both getting around that ambushing.
Yes. I love that. That's great.
Which is and that also works with adults. Like, hey, honey, can we talk about our date night? I'm feeling disconnected these days. Can we, and it's starting in a soft way. Very helpful.
So much better than being like, how come you never take me out on a date?
Right. Where are the flowers?
Yes. It's really a way of getting what you want. It sounds to some people probably like, well, they're really coddling, going to all that effort just to get,
okay.
It really does get you what you want.
Yeah. Well, the alternative is bringing it up, where are the flowers? And immediately that other human is going to have a really hard time not going into the defensive, which I always say, as soon as we're in the defense, that's the first step of don't go further in the conversation. So it definitely helps with that connection piece of relationships.
Great.
Speaking of, I love the part of your book where you talk about conversation crashers.
Yes.
Could you dive in a little to any of those?
Sure. So these are things, the way I structured the book is that in the first 3 chapters, I've asked people to read in a row, like a normal book. After that, it's sort of a choose your own adventure. If you need to go directly to the chapter on sex or directly to there's one on money, there's one on creativity, there's one on independence. So you can go as you need to go, but the first 3 are really foundational. And one of those is about conversation crashers. So these are things that we all do kind of at a universal level that can kill a conversation. And then within each chapter, I'll have specific conversation crashers on sex or money or whatever it may be. But the kind of general ones that can really turn people off in a conversation that I do, that we all do from time to time. So it's just a matter of sort of, it's not a judgment. It's just like a way to kind of raise your awareness of these things, is assuming how other people will feel. And I just did this to my college age son about a week ago, and I wrote, don't do it. But of course it's hard to correct ourselves, like give ourselves grace. We're still going to make mistakes.
Not perfect.
So assuming feelings sounds like saying, I think you're going to regret that in the future.
Mm.
Or just flat out, you're going to regret it if you do that, which is what I said to my
Mhm.
kid. And then I immediately went, you know what?
Yeah.
I actually wrote that parents aren't supposed to say that to their kids. Let me walk that back and tell you what I'm thinking. But kids in early adolescence, again, you mentioned it, and we talked about that age of individuation.
Mhm.
So when we as adults say to kids how they feel or how they will feel in the future, they're like, you don't know me. You
Mhm.
can't presume what's in my head. And they will often dig their heels in on something just to
Mhm.
prove that you're wrong about it. So rather than saying, um, I wouldn't post that. You're going to regret it in the future. If you post a picture like that on social media, what you'd, what would work better is to ask them questions. What will
Yeah.
it be like in a few years to look back on this? Or how do you think other people will react to this? Or how does this make you feel when you see other people do this sort of thing? So engaging with questions is much better than
I
maybe.
love that. And it's, yeah, I feel like questions pretty much no matter what will be very helpful instead of, yeah, again, telling someone you're going to regret that or you feel this way. As an adult, it's like, don't you tell me I'm going to regret it. Let me go try it.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's a big one, and a couple other just universal ones are, and we all know this one, using absolutes. But
Mm.
but when our buttons are pushed, when our kids have like gotten on our last nerve, that's when we tend to go to the always and never. You never take your stuff up when I leave it on the stairs, and it's always messy down here. And kids don't respond well to that. No one does, but in particular, adolescents, their brains are making a shift from hypothetical to, or from concrete to hypothetical thinking. And
Mm.
so where there is room for gray area, they're going to find it and point it back at you. So
Uh,
they're like little lawyers, and they will be quick to say, that's not true. I did do it in June.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And then that's when I find myself debating, like I call it in the weeds. I'm like, what are we even talking about? I was here talking about your curfew, and now here you're telling me how I always serve dinner.
Right.
Yeah, it definitely, that lawyer-like question.
Yeah, you
It-
get back on your heels and then you're losing. So absolutes, avoid those. And I think another kind of top three is being passive aggressive, which parents do a lot with their kids when they're fried.
What do you mean by that?
So that's, when I serve my kids dinner and I'm already exhausted and I've made dinner, I put it on the table and they're like, oh, chicken. And I go to, oh, yeah, chicken. And you know what? I don't have to cook anymore. So guess what?
This is your last meal.
This is your last meal. You're cooking for yourselves from now on. And that does no one any good. And what I've found is, again, if you can take a deep breath and think about what you need, think about how you feel, and just say that very plainly to your kids. That hurts my feelings because I'm exhausted and I worked hard. And
Yeah.
so, how can we avoid this in the future? But
Yeah.
just really honest.
Yeah. And again, yeah, I really like that. To just be aware with where you are. Like, it's again, if it triggers me, it's about me. Like, okay, them saying something about chicken, I can take that factual. What am I going to make it mean? I'm going to make it mean that maybe my chicken isn't that great, but I am needing a little more gratitude. And
I love
so, okay, I understand you don't like what I'm cooking, and I made it. So
it.
can
Yeah.
we just have a moment of pause? Thank you, Mom. And then we can have some feedback as to what other meals you might like and how you can
Beautiful.
get involved. Yeah.
That is beautiful.
I like that a lot. Well, and I like, yeah, I like the idea of the absolutes too. I'm sort of stuck on because I get tricked into, speaking of defending, sort of defending myself. If it's like, okay, time to put your phone away, and they say, you don't put your phone away, and it gets into this debate as to why I don't put my phone away versus sticking with just the guideline. It doesn't matter what I do. This is our house rule.
That's right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So helpful. Very
Good.
nice. There is, I forget because someone borrowed my book, but it was in one of the chapters you talk about criticism
Mhm.
and how there was a Harvard study of 2017 and how traditional feedback is not exactly as effective, sort of pointing out people's flaws is not as effective as we think it could be. Could you speak to this a little?
Sure. Yeah, I found this really interesting. I think it makes perfect common sense, but we have somehow gotten this into our minds that the way for people to grow and to be better is for us to point out what they need to do better, right? And so we will say to our kids, one thing you really need to work on is really working ahead on your schoolwork because you get just behind the eight ball and then you're turning stuff in late. So that's something you really need to work on. When a person hears opportunities for growth is one way we phrase these things when we really just mean stuff that's wrong with them. When we tell someone something that we see that they are not doing well, they shut down.
Mm.
It is human nature, and literally your brain, the neurons in your brain, do not connect as energetically as they do when we hear a compliment. And so it feels counterintuitive a little bit to us as parents that when our kid isn't doing something right, we would flatter them. But actually, if you can couch your feedback in a strength that they have before you get to the part where they need to make an improvement, their brain neurons will start firing and they will be receptive and they will be far more able to process the feedback you're giving them. So you might say something like, you know what, you are really good at working quickly. I notice that you often get started on projects, later than I would, but look at you, you're flying through that. Like, turn it into some kind of a compliment, because
Yeah.
there's always a flip side of every coin. Like,
Mhm.
man, you get to work fast.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I think would help you is if you could take that speed of yours and you could turn it on 2 days earlier. Man, think about all the work you could get done.
Mm.
And you need to work on getting your work in sooner. End of story.
Oh, and you also are not telling them how they feel. I notice that you get really stressed when like that's, don't you tell me what I need.
Exactly. I'm not stressed, even though they're crying through
Yeah.
their tears. Yeah. I'm not tired. I don't need a nap. We all remember when our kids did that when they were little. This is just a 13-year-old version of that.
which reminds me, could you speak a little of the importance of our nonverbal communication?
Oh, yes. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. So
I've been practicing.
oh, good. Yes. Okay. So if you're watching
Because
us,
we're like, what are they talking about?
yeah, if you're watching us on YouTube, we are really caressing our foreheads right now. But this is a tip that I have been giving for years. So it's based on another study out of Harvard, out of one of their teaching hospitals, and a neurologist who was interested in learning about how we interpret facial expressions. So she put adults through an MRI and showed them photos of people's faces and said, can you, just by looking at this person's face, tell me how they feel? It was basic emotions, and adults could do it correctly 100% of the time, pretty much. It was a small study, but still, they could say that person is scared or that person is angry. They could tell the difference between that and happiness or whatever. And because they were hooked up to an MRI, she saw that they were using their prefrontal cortex to do that. She did the same thing with teens, showed them the same photos and said, can you tell me what this person is feeling by looking at their face? And teens only got it right 50% of the time. They were using the amygdala. And it's just this whole amazing rewiring of the brain that happens in order for kids to be able to grow and become adults. But the part of the brain that is used to read facial expressions is not working for them during adolescence. So they get it wrong. And what happens is they see our old wrinkly faces. And so they come in the door and we say, oh, hey, how did your math test go? And we furrow our brow, which to me is my like curious or interested face or concentrating face, and always reads as anger. She's an adolescent. And so they look at you, you've asked an innocent question that you think is quite nice. And they say, I don't even know. Why are you getting mad at me? We don't even have our grades. And they storm off. So this happens in families all the time, a miscommunication over facial expressions. So my tip is to have what I call a Botox brow. And I want you to pretend you're a celebrity on a late night talk show and you've been so overly Botoxed you cannot move your forehead. Yeah. It's not deer in the headlights, big eyes. It's very neutral, like look like you could care less. Couldn't care less. And then that's the expression you're going to have when you talk to your kid. You're going to feel like you look really dull and your kid's going to open up and start telling you stuff.
I love it. Thank you. I think this is all just such great because we've all been there. And I remember myself as a middle schooler being like, why are you angry?
Yes.
I'm not. I'm like, yes, you are.
Oh yeah, and then you would get into the debate where you're trying
Oh,
to
yeah.
convince the parent. You really are angry.
Well, and then the beauty is you aren't talking about the math test anymore. So it's
Exactly right.
like,
What a
okay.
distraction. Yes.
A nice distraction. Well, thank you very much. Is there any area of this book that you find is sort of surprising to you and that it's resonating really a lot with parents, or it's getting really more helpful than you thought, or more feedback?
I mean, I would say there's not one topic that parents are saying, man, like, because I'm finding each family has a different
Yes.
topic that they need. I have a, I might hear from a family that says like, oh, the technology chapter was just what we needed right now. And someone else will say, gosh, that part about self-harm and suicide, we really had to have that talk. And I'm glad you told me how to do that.
Mhm.
So different kind of aha light bulb moments for different families. But the joyful thing for me is hearing that wide range and just having, I had a mom who wrote me who said, my daughter told me she's really glad I'm reading that book because I'm talking to her differently. And I was like, oh,
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Yeah. And that is something I want to make sure to mention, is that you give actual scripts and ways to have these conversations about, the difficult topics you just said, and porn and tech use and impulsivity, a whole bunch of things, and really hold our hands as parents in these conversations. And it's a great resource and a great book. So I will have links to all of that in the show notes. I also want to mention how I love your message throughout both your books and all your work, that I will also have mentioned, in just this idea that there is no perfect parent. We are all doing the best we can. It's progress. Pick yourself up, get started again. Doesn't matter if your kid is 32, or you don't have kids and you're talking to your own parents or your spouse. But there are definitely tools in here for everyone. And I really appreciate that.
thank you. I love to hear it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming on the Love Your Life show. And if listeners want to reach out to you, aside from buying your book, where is the best place to connect with?
I'm having a ton of fun on Instagram right now.
Okay.
And so if you're there, please follow me, DM me, chat in the posts. I love that. And my website is just my name. It's michelleicard.com. So
Yep.
follow me there.
Great. Well, we will pop in and tell you all the conversations we're having. So
I would love it.
talk about curfew or
Yes.
anything fun, let her know.
Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle.
All right. Thanks, Susie.